Hello everybody and welcome to the Birds and BBV Bites. Today is Tuesday the 5th of July and I can see that we've got Billy with us. Hi Billy, how are you? And I think Billy, you're on your lonesome today so far. And my guest speaker today is Lorna Gerrity. She's from the YEP program, which is Youth Educating Peers. And so I'm going to hand it over to you shortly, Lorna. But before I do, I just wanted to make sure that I let you all know I'm going to be recording this bite and it will be made available on the Aqua YouTube channel. So for those people who don't want to put your camera on because it's being recorded, that's absolutely fine. I'll leave my camera on for you, Lorna, and I'll also keep an eye on the chat page as well. So take it away, Lorna.
Cool. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Right, before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the wonderful budget which I'm on today. I am sitting on Wajak Noongar country, Nyalakadak Noongar Mort Kane Kadak Nija Budja. I'd like to pay my respects to our elders, past and present, and I'd also really love to acknowledge the amazing Aboriginal young people that I've had the absolute pleasure of walking alongside and working with their families, whether that's as clients of mine or as colleagues or just people within my life. They've definitely made my spirit stronger for it, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with those young people. I'd also like to acknowledge that many of you are sitting on other countries, so just acknowledging that. And also to celebrate that it's NAIDOC week, probably one of the best weeks of the year. So yeah, thank you. Cool. So just some guidelines for our chat today. These are the same guidelines that we use sometimes with our young people. So everything that we're going through today, if I'm sharing some of our resources, please do feel free to use in your own work as well. So some of the guidelines are that it's a non-judgmental environment. We ask for willingness to be open-minded. Confidentiality. So obviously this webinar is also being recorded. So if you want to share anything, just try to de-identify. We ask that you avoid assumptions and speak from the heart. So what we say by that is, instead of saying like, oh, well, we've all found or we all believe, saying things like, oh, I found or I believe. You have an absolute will. It's your choice to participate. Probably the more you participate in this, the more you'll get out. But you always have a right to pass. This is a webinar, so it won't be as interactive as we would be if we were in a physical space. But yeah. Also being really aware of who else is in the room. So me, for example, I'm in an open plan office. You know, if you're at home, maybe you want to angle your laptop or computer a particular way, just because we will be talking about consent and it can be triggering for some people. So just being aware of that. Because of that, we do ask that people try to focus on the workshop for the period, because it may be a bit full on for you. And we do ask that you practice some self-care. So afterwards in the evening, whatever that is for you, we've got some suggestions on the right as to what that might look like.
Okay.
So just one thing I might recommend is, if you are not asking a question, maybe if everyone could mute their mics, that might be helpful for everybody. Or Veronica, I don't know if you're able to mute other people's mics if they need to.
Thank you. I think it was just one. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Happy for you to unmute and ask questions at any time. And I think Veronica as well will be monitoring that chat, my trusty assistant. Thank you, Veronica. So an overview of what we'll be doing today is just a short session. So a bit about YEP. We'll go through our consent resources and some activities and some considerations then when talking about consent. So what is YEP? So we stand for the Youth Educating Peers Project. We operate under YACWA. So YACWA is our organization. So we do two main things. So youth education. So we have a small number of peers located in the metro area that provide sexual health workshops and go out to like community days and things like that, providing sexual health education. So things like STIs and bloodborne viruses, consent, LGBTIQA plus 101, contraception, things like that. And they also create social media content on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And then we also have youth sector capacity building, so professional development sessions, so like half day or full day trainings, and also a consultation service. So we do have a very small capacity to go regionally, but if you are located in the regions, we can offer things online. Um, and all of our services are offered free of charge to the youth and sexual health sector. So do feel free to reach out if that's something you're interested in. Cool. Consent. We're going to lock into it. Okay. So when talking and educating about consent, there's many different ways that young people can learn. The same as me, I'm a visual learner. I've got other people that are more kinesthetic, and some people like a lot of text. We need to be really reflective about what's the different learning styles of our young people so that we can find different types of activities and approaches that work for them. This is a great resource that I like to plug. This is from SECA or SECA. It's called Sexuality, Relationships and Your Rights. And it also has an application version for this for people that would rather use tech. So SECA stands for Sexuality Education Counseling Consultancy Agency. So they are located in the metro area, but you can request consultancy and telehealth services from them as well. Within this resource, it does talk about consent. This is an example of it. So it uses, if any of you have worked with children with autism or a variety of different disabilities, you may be used to PECS images, which is like the image in the square. So what SECA did was that they took the style of PECS images and recognized that people from these backgrounds would benefit from a similar resource, but that it talked about sexuality. Because when we look at PECS, it's very juvenile in the kind of content that it uses. So things like, I want basic needs, food, sharing, things like that. So they created a resource that had explicit content. So you can take or remove icons from the app and things like that. So, you may want to show genitals to a particular young person and you may not another, or you may take out for different lessons and you can use it that way as well. So it goes really clearly through about talking about what consent means and what that looks like. So often we may hear that young people with disabilities are kind of at the two ends of these things, that it may be young women are more likely that with disabilities to be victims of sexual assault. And we also know that unfortunately young people that are often charged with sexual assault charges may actually themselves have a disability, and it wasn't necessarily that was something that they wanted to do, it was that they didn't understand how to navigate consent and they weren't aware that these things were incorrect. And we're also aware that often people with disabilities are kind of seen as maybe not having a sexuality and they aren't afforded the same education as other young people, which is entirely incorrect. Everybody is entitled to a healthy sexual life if they want it. So it's important that we have these conversations with everybody. So it's why we really like to plug this resource. So when we were talking about consent, this is the old model that the EP crew used to do. We'd be practicing this in the office before they go out on shift. I'd be like, right, guys, you're about to go out onto doing a stall. Let's practice the FRIES model. What does it stand for? And they're like, freely given, reversible, and then be getting stuck. I'm like, right, if we're practicing this over and over again and we're getting stuck and we go out on shift and then the young people are like, oh yeah, the thing with the chips. And I'm like, oh, this isn't working. So I was like, right, we're going to have to start thinking about a different acronym or a different way to start talking about consent. And what the peer educators really found was that when they were out in community, that they really wanted to talk about different and specific situations and where consent needed to be applied and how to navigate that. So this is where a consent card resource has come from. So came from the peers kind of identifying an issue, going out and talking to young people. And we also did community and youth and sector consultation. So we had young people that volunteered to kind of do focus groups. And then we also had young people creating the content. So you'll see kind of the early stages of it on the left. And then we really recognized that the images that we could find online that were already made weren't providing the tone that we wanted and really the representation of young people. So young people were like, I want to see me in this resource. I want to see my mates in this resource. And what's on the computer just isn't showing the diversity and the organic nature of our community. So our focus groups really looked at having young people from different SHBBV target focus. So we had young people from those create the resources. So welcome to the consent cards. If you've been following us on socials, you'll have seen them. So this is what it looks like. So we've just finished our social media campaign. We are finalizing our teaching resource to be launched soon on the website, just going through final admin jerks. So the teaching resource provides things like talking points, suggested accompanying activities, and links to other services as well. But as well, you will find just some small information on each social media tile as well. So I'll just go through them. So the first one is just the cover. Let's talking about consent. So these are some of the dollies that the young people created. So consent, this is just providing an overview of what consent is. So it's about permission. We're not even talking about it in a sexual way right now. We're just talking about like, what does consent mean? What is an agreement? Because we've really learned from different communities that we've been out with that we really just need for some young people to just start at the very beginning. They may have never talked about permission and asking things before in their community or in their lives. So we really need to start from the ground up. We'll always make sure to talk about a content warning. So letting the young people know in advance what we're about to talk about, because it may be too triggering for them. And we always provide young people with the opportunity to go and do a different activity. So we'll have another youth worker in a different space, setting up a different activity that's there, and always allowing young people to enter and or exit the space. Will close off entering the space after a certain time to give people space and to kind of know who's there, to kind of not be worrying about like, is my ex going to walk in? Is my cousin going to walk in? Is my sister going to walk in? Things like that. So we talk about capacity. What does capacity mean? We start off by talking about self-care, because this can be really triggering for some people, and talking about like, what does self-care look like? How can you do it? Then we start talking about like, what does sexual consent mean? We talk about what's a non-consensual act. And I guess this is really important, that when we go out into communities, that we have youth workers there that are prepared and ready for disclosures of sexual assault or sexual violence, because often when we talk about consent, it's quite common for young people to realize that a non-consensual act has happened to them. So it's important that as service workers, we're ready to receive that, and we know our local services that can support that. And I guess also setting up your session in a way that's supportive of the young people. So, for example, the EP crew will never leave bang on when a service is closing. There'll always be half an hour at least, in case a disclosure happens, and the youth workers there to provide the support. It's not like, oh, we're locking up the centre now, bye. So that wraparound support can be there. Then we talk about who needs to get consent. Then we talk about checking in, and we have an accompanying activity to go with that about like how you can check in with your body and what that might feel like. So again, that's detailed in the teaching resource. And if I have time at the end, I'll also just talk a bit more about that. We talk about checking in with others, how you can do that, some examples of it. Often the times I'll find like young people coming up and they'll be like, oh, miss, that's so shame. I can't just be like, oh, do you consent to sex? I'm like, that's not what we're doing. I'm providing them with like things like, you could say like, does that feel good? Is that okay? And they're like, ah, yeah, I do that. And I'm like, you're doing consent. So often young people are really on board with this consent thing. They just think that it's this convoluted, really dorky idea that we kind of just need to break down. So this is the idea of these talking points. We talk about free from pressure and worry, and spending some time unpacking those with different groups or different individuals that you may use these cards. You may just end up using one card or using just a small number. It may be too overwhelming to do this. I feel like you'll probably know your clients best as to what way to do that. We talk about changing your mind. For a lot of young people, that can be a big one. Oh, I thought if I said yes, let's hook up on Saturday, and the Saturday rolled around, I had to. Or I thought if I said yes at the beginning, I had to keep going. Things like that. Then we talk about the age of consent, so that for penetrative and oral sex, you have to be over the age of 16. And then often what can be really confusing then is that for the legal age of sexting is 18. So we spend time talking about that, because young people are always like, oh, but hold on. So you're saying I can have sex with my boyfriend or my girlfriend when I'm 16, but I can't send them a nude. I'm like, no, I know, really random. And we'll talk about like how those laws are created for different reasons, and why some of that historical context is there. We do also have we take a harm minimization approach at YEP. So we always tell people what the legal consequences are, but then we do also have a harm reduction sexting workshop that we do as well, so that if young people are going to do that, how can they do that in the safest way? And we talk about consent and also some legal consequences in that. So that's another thing that you can either request a webinar on or have us out to you. Then we talk about the position of power and how, it's not just a teacher, it could be your supervisor at Macca's, it could be your footy coach, things like that, and that how all people within those contexts need to be over 18. And then we'll also spend time talking about, like, even if you are over 18, is there kind of like a bit of an power imbalance if someone is your boss, if someone's your coach? Like, how does that work? How do we feel about it? So a lot of the time it's just about posing questions and the young people start having a yarn themselves. We talk about drinking and taking drugs. Again, we take a harm minimization approach at Yep, so it's up to you. I know for a lot of the young ones I would have worked with, if I was like, oh, I never have sex when you're drinking, they'd be like, well, fine, I just won't ever have this consent conversation then, because that's always what I do on the weekends. Or some young people I've worked with, they're alcohol dependent. So it would actually be really unsafe for them not to have a small amount of alcohol in their system. So we have some talking points and some other alcohol and drug activities to start getting young people to think about maybe different levels of alcohol use, or what it's like if someone has never used before, what if someone's way more intoxicated, and then obviously some blanket rules about, like, if someone's blacked out, things like that. And then going back to their body signs, how to be aware of these things and also how to check in. So that's a big one. That could be a whole webinar itself. Then we talk about specific areas of the body. This was a big one for young people. A lot of the young people we were talking to were saying that, oh, I thought if I said yes to sex, I had to do all of the things. Or yes, I said yes to my partner to have sex, and then all of a sudden we started having anal, and I didn't think I could say no because I said yes at the beginning to sex, but I wasn't specific enough. So we spend time talking to young people about how consent is specific, and that you have rights to say yes, no, and maybe to absolutely everything, and that it also is about different specific acts. So it's not just about parts of your body, it's also like, well, maybe you're okay with touching there but not kissing and things like that. Then we talk about contraception. So what is contraception, and then how to have consent, we need to make sure that everybody's informed. If contraception needs to be used or has been used, what's the plan? So we really encourage young people to have those conversations before they have sex. And we're like, you don't need to have this right before. Maybe if you're going to see them on the weekend, can you have this conversation during the week or whatever, or a few weeks before you do it, having an idea. So what that looks like. Then we'll spend some time talking about reproductive coercion. Um, some of you may know that SHQ is actually doing a project on this, and you can find some extra resources there. Again, just being really aware that these kind of conversations are maybe quite triggering and sensitive for people. So just making sure you're doing it in the right space. Then we talk about protection and barrier methods. So this can be a good time to start whipping them out, talking about them, showing young people how to use them, and talking about how we need to have these conversations around consent as well. And then a lot of the communities we were with wanted us to really talk about non-consensual condom removal. You may have heard about it being called stealthing maybe in your community. So we've gone for a non-consensual condom removal. Some of the consultation we had was a bit like, stealthing sounds kind of cool. And obviously that's not what we want to put forward. So non-consensual condom removal is just when somebody agrees to use a condom, but it's removed without their permission or their consent. And we've just spent time kind of really hearing from young people that that's happened to, that they really wanted to see it kind of being out in the open, that could be acknowledged, that that's something that's not okay. We talk about STI and BBV testing, so really encouraging young people to talk about that. There's a few different examples actually of that in shows on Netflix, where people are about to hook up and they're like, hey, when was your last test? And we're like, that's all it is, just being really blatant and out. And that may seem really random, but once you keep doing it, it's just going to seem like a normal part of your sex life that you do. You don't have to do it right at the beginning. You can have it at a different time. We'll talk to young people about, like, would you rather text it? How do you want to do it? Consent in a relationship. So some communities we go out to, they may have had a belief that, oh, I just thought, like, if we're in a long-term relationship or we're married, that I just have to agree all the time. And we've had really consistent feedback from young people from a variety of communities that they really want to have the space to have permission, that consent is always there, regardless of what your relationship is. And for some centers we go out to, that may be the only card we do. And we may spend a lot of time doing that. And I guess just being aware that if you do have young people from particular backgrounds, it may always be great to have different cultural members within your staff as well to kind of help facilitate that conversation. Oh, now my slides don't want to work. There we go. Then we talk about digital and online consent. So 2022, people kind of play out their sexual lives now in both the online space and in real life at the same time. So it's just really important that when we talk about consent, we're not just talking about when it happens person to person. We're like, okay, so we try to break it down at being like, consensual dick pics are okay. Non-consensual dick pics, not so great. So just talking about it, and that consent needs to be obtained wherever you are. And then we'll spend some time talking about image-based abuse and also pointing people in the direction of the e-safety commissioner, that if image-based abuse has happened, that they can access support from there. And the teaching resource also goes through information about what is image-based abuse and how to combat it and support young people through that process. And then lastly, we end on everyone has the responsibility to get consent from their sexual partners, and that everybody has a right to give their consent or not give their consent. So that is the consent cards. And as I was saying, the teaching resource to go with that will be coming soon. Are there any questions? How am I going for time, Veronica?
Oh, you're going well. It's 12:21. Um,
Cool.
my question is, like how big are the cards? Are they?
Yeah, so we've made them in a way that you could print them, I think probably A4. You could make them A3, but we usually use them as A5.
Oh yeah.
Um, but they'll be downloadable on the website, so you can print them off on whatever size you think. So, if you
Oh,
want to have a deck of cards in your pocket, Veronica, feel free to make them that size.
yeah. Oh no, I think it's a great resource because it's got the pictures as well to create like a really good activity.
Yeah.
Because yeah, we were just in Walloona last week, and I reckon those cards would have been awesome to have. Yeah,
Yeah,
with
awesome.
young ones there. Yeah.
So we have thank you for bringing up the pictures, because we have also made a version with the text removed. So it just has the titles to kind of that they may be more beneficial in community, that maybe if it's just a title to be like, oh, what do you think that means?
Yes.
Like time specific, what do you think that looks like? Because
Yeah.
I know if I was to hand out a card to a young person that already had the answer there, they'd be like, oh, it means this thing. And you're not kind of inviting a discussion. And I guess, yeah, we also try to make things as accessible as possible. So we really wanted to use easy English in our titles and not wanting to inhibit anybody that had different comfortabilities with literacy and kind of not wanting to shut them off. So try to remove languages as much as we could sometimes. So this is an example of some of the activities that we partner with some of the cards. Whoop, if I go the right way. So this is body science. So if some of you have done protective behaviors before, you may have done something similar to this. So we asking people to think about a time that you were really anxious or worried. So I might ask you to do that now. So for me, I'm going to think about before those year 12 exams. I feel my heart racing. I feel the butterflies going. I can feel my mouth starting to get a bit shaky. My hands are starting to get sweaty. So we spend time with young people going through the body from the top of our head, what's in our brains, all the way down our bodies, down to our toes, thinking about what our body signs are telling us. So again, the teaching resource will go through that. So for example, your brain may be foggy. Other people, it may be that they're having racing thoughts. Your heart could be pounding. Your knees could be shaking. Some people might want to run away. Some people might want to stay. So it's about getting young people kind of in touch with what are some of the signs their body may be giving with them when they're not feeling comfortable. Because a lot of the young people I know that we work with, talking about feelings and emotions is just not something that they've necessarily done before, they feel very confident with, or if
Mm.
they have different abilities, it may just not be something that's necessarily in their vocabulary or something they really struggle with. So it may not be that your young person's able to come up with the whole body, but they may be like, oh, I know when my heart starts going, I'm feeling anxious. And it's like, okay, well, maybe if you're in a sexual situation in the future, notice if that heart's going, okay, and what else is maybe showing you. Could that maybe mean that you're anxious? And that might be a bit easier than checking in with, where's my brain doing right now? Especially if you're the type of person where your brain goes foggy. Sometimes it can be easier to check in with those body signs. We also have a touch chart. So we wanted to make this something that was basic that you could either download, or also something that, if you're 21, you're in Northbridge, you want to get a napkin, you want to doodle it on something that you could just draw an outline of the body and kind of shade in areas that you feel okay, maybe, or not okay. Because we're really hearing from young people that they really want to do consent, but they may feel a little bit shame about actually putting it into words in a conversation. So they may prefer to talk about it or text it. So we know some young people that have actually printed this out, colored it in, and they take a photo of it and they've got it on their phone and they'll send it on hookup apps or whatever they're using. But it's also then really important to remind people that that's okay, that maybe they said that place was a green on Tuesday. They have every right Tuesday evening to say that's now red, and vice versa. We also have a activity we use about how to talk about consent. So remember before I was saying that often young people were like, oh, I might think like I need to be like, do you consent? So we actually will go through different layers of like getting people into groups, of being like, right, let's think of some ways that we can say, do with our body, or use technology to give consent. So an example could be like, oh, fuck me. It could be sending the winky emoji and a tick. It could be pulling someone into you. How to not give consent could be pretending to be asleep, sending someone this emoji. And ways to get consent could be, sending the eggplant emoji and a question mark and waiting for a response, things like that. So again, this is all detailed in the teaching resource. These are some videos that we also show sometimes about consent. TikTok is a wealth of resources around consent. You can just put in the hashtag consent and you'll find a whole suite of different videos that are there. So you could go through that with your young people or find some that are there. What I will recommend is not finding them in advance and then saving that in a folder, because I swear to God, by the time you found a video and by the time you find the young people, if it's a couple of weeks later, that won't be trending anymore and they'll think you're really late. So just do it on the day. So just some content about some considerations. So again, just a trigger warning that I will be talking a bit about sexual assault. So if you need to turn off your mics and just see me later, that's totally fine, or close down your laptops, that's understandable. So when is it appropriate to do workshops? So often we'll get calls from communities maybe after a sexual assault has happened and they're like, hey, this has happened. We really want to be proactive. Can you come in and talk about consent? It's not the time for me to be talking about consent. At that time, we really need to be focusing on the young people that were involved in the situation, and also providing wraparound support for the community. So there'll kind of be a close maybe section of friends, faction may form, could be the school community, could be the wider community. People will start talking about it. So we need to do that healing space. And they are in a state of trauma. So even if I came in and started talking about consent, they're not ready to listen and it's not going to sink in. So feel free to use that as a reason if you've got an angry mum or a minister or a reporter on the phone saying, what are you doing about it? Providing that immediate support and care, whether that's just, sitting around having a yarn and a tea, that's what you're doing. And then after that trauma is kind of healed a bit, that's when we can come in and start talking about consent, or you can do your own workshop or content. We always like to provide advance warning before the topic is broached, because it can be really personal for people. So, and also providing young people with the option to not intend. So sometimes if we were, let's just say, going out to a region, letters will go home, young people will be reminded a couple of times, and they'll be given a different option. So it could be like, oh, yep, we'll be here for the first lesson. If you miss the first lesson, you won't get a mark for being late. Or if you don't come to this thing, you can go to the library instead, things like that. Like I said before, disclosures are often likely following a discussion about consent, so it's important that immediate and ongoing support is available. And really, if that does happen, it's about validating the experience, believing that young person and holding space. And when we talk about providing support options, we like to see those made available to all young people, not just the young people that have made disclosures, for a few reasons. It's not just about people that have made disclosures that this stuff has happened to. You don't want to single them out. And also, you're educating young people that will then probably go on and provide this information to their friends. We know that young people are more likely to disclose to a peer rather than probably an adult. So the more young people can feel empowered if they've received something like that, that can be really helpful. And we also like to really reassure young people about what the service is going to look like, because it's so scary to even deal with that process, let alone think about what a service is going to look like. So letting them know what it looks like. Ideally, if you could find a photo or a video of what that service looks like inside, if you could maybe go there, be like, oh, I know Jenny down there. She's really cool. Let's go see her. Ask about what's involved. What's the process actually like? Are there time frames? Is there a wait list? What the frig is a wait list? If you're 15, do you know what a wait list is? Are there costs? What have you heard about it from other young people? Things like that. Trying to get this to go. So we recommend SARC. So SARC has a number of resources online. So it is their main offices in Perth, but they do also provide a range of free services to the people across the state and their 24-hour emergency line. And they provide counselling as well. SHQ also provides counselling services as well for people affected by sexual assault. And they also have actually a shorter waitlist than SARC. So good to recommend. But SARC does a large amount of professional development training. So if this is something you need support around, I'd highly recommend them. This is a care package that we often will bring out for services so that they can have it there. So the care package is entitled for adults who've experienced sexual trauma, but in our reading for it, we found it really accessible for young people, and we find the images as well are quite accessible. So this is an example of what it goes through. It will talk about what are some of the common reactions that a person may experience after trauma. So what their body is doing, what are some thoughts, some feelings, behaviors. Because often we know the young people we work with are amazingly resilient. They're like, that didn't affect me. And it's like, well, maybe some of these things are happening. And they're like, well, no, I'm fine. And it's like, no, honey, it's not that. It's not a weakness. Your body's having this reaction because trauma has happened, and that's okay. And this resource really beautifully cares for what that's like. It's a normal response. You can't control that. And what are some ways that you can work through that? We always like to just make sure that we talk at the end of our sessions about trauma responses. So flight, fries, freeze, fawn. Some of you may know a couple of others, but these are the kind of the four main ones, because a lot of the time we may talk about consent, and we can practice teaching in people how to say no, blah, 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 till we're blue in the face, and they can practice it as many times. But really, once you're in a situation, it's up to your brain how it responds. And if a young person has fawned or has just frozen in a situation, they may feel, when we're talking about consent, that they're like, oh, well, I deserve that because I didn't say no. I didn't do anything. So we really spend time talking to young people about like how you can't control your brain or your body in those spaces, and that's a trauma response, and that's not your fault, and it's not something you can control, and just allowing them to feel like that's valid. So this is something that the SARC another screenshot of the SARC resource. So it talks about recovery. So self-care and recovery are much like taking care of a plant. They require attention, effort, nurturing, and patience. Over time, the plant will flourish and thrive, and over time, you too, and the results will be worth it. So again, this is just some of the self-care or the professional development. I'm needing some self-care today, clearly. Some professional development workshops that SARC do. And they can go to the regions as well. So that wraps up us talking about consent. So do follow us on socials. You can also log on to our website, and you can email us or ask to be added to our email list as well from there. So yeah, thanks very much for having me. Any questions?
I meant to say that Helen from Fitzroy Crossing said she didn't have any questions earlier, but she's been loving seeing the cards online, and they're fantastic.
Ah, thanks very much. That's great. I'm glad they're getting up there.
You've sent through a lot of great information and resources, Lorna, and with links. Would it be okay if I shared your PowerPoint presentation with those in the group so that they've got the links there?
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll email it through to you now, Veronica.
Okay, that'd be great, because I mean.
Oh, actually, I won't today because we're having issues with our emails, but I will.
Yep. Okay,
Yep.
so I'll send that out to everybody, and then they'll be able to go onto the link. So yeah. Was there any other questions from anybody online? No. Well, thank you. Oh, is that you, Tracy?
Yeah. Sorry, I just been to the dentist. Oh,
Oh, that's okay.
I went to the dentist, so yeah. Sorry, I missed it.
Oh, look, that's all right, Tracy. I've recorded it for you. So it'll
Okay,
be,
good.
yep, I'll download it and it'll be on the Aqua website probably in about a week's time.
Okay, no worries.
And I'll also send you through the PowerPoint presentation. It was really good. I think you'd find it really helpful, particularly for young people in Derby who you're working with. So I'll send you through the PowerPoint presentation. There's loads of information and resources on there. And Lorna, sorry, when did you say the cards would be available?
So the cards are, well, I mean, you can see them on our socials as of now.
Yep.
So they're all available on that.
Yep.
Website and the teaching resource probably in a couple of weeks. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep. It's all done. You know what it's like trying to just get all the ducks in a row. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
totally
and if there's anybody on here that was part of the survey consultation or a focus group, thank you so much for that. It's been really valuable having everybody's input.
Mary has put up no questions, but amazing presentation. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to end the bite and say thanks very much, Lorna. And we'd love to have you back again, perhaps around some harm reduction for consent that you were talking about. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
See you.
Bye.